It was the last cold week of autumn, 2009, in the small river town of Marin Falls, Ohio. A 20-year-old college student named Dana Whitlock walked into the Greyhound station on 3rd Street to catch a late bus home for the holidays. She bought a ticket. She sat on a wooden bench beneath a flickering light. And then she vanished without a trace. Her bag was found. Her ticket was found. But Dana was never seen boarding, never seen leaving, never seen again. Police searched for months and found nothing. The case quickly went cold. But 14 years later, one small detail reopened everything and revealed a truth no one was prepared for. If stories like this one matter to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow and lets us keep telling the stories that deserve to be remembered. Now, let's get into today's case. To understand what was lost, you have to understand Dana Whitlock. She was 20 years old, a sophomore studying nursing at Coldwater Community College, 2 towns over. She had a laugh that arrived a half-second too early, always, like she'd heard the funny part before anyone else got there. She wore the same gray canvas jacket in every season, sleeves pushed to the elbow, a small enamel pin of a robin fastened over the heart. She kept peppermints in her pockets and gave them to strangers. She wrote left-handed, in tiny, careful print, and she chewed the ends of her pens until they cracked. Her older brother Marcus adored her. Marcus was 26 that autumn, a diesel mechanic with grease permanently pressed into the lines of his knuckles. Their mother had raised the two of them alone in a narrow house on Pearl Street. And when she got sick during Dana's senior year of high school, it was Marcus who drove Dana to school, Marcus who signed the forms, Marcus who learned to braid hair badly and burn eggs cheerfully. He was more than a brother. He was the one steady thing in her life, and she was the one bright thing in his. They had a ritual. Every Sunday, no matter what, Dana called him at 7 in the evening. She'd talk for exactly as long as it took him to finish a cup of coffee. And when he set the empty mug down, she'd say, "Okay, that's your cup. I'll let you go." 14 years later, Marcus still couldn't drink coffee at 7 on a Sunday without his hands shaking. Their house on Pearl Street was small and loud and warm. Dana had covered one whole wall of the kitchen in Polaroids, taped up crooked the two of them at the county fair, their mother asleep in a lawn chair. A birthday cake Marcus had dropped and served anyway. Dana studied at that kitchen table every night, textbooks fanned out under the yellow overhead light, a highlighter behind her ear that she was forever losing and forever accusing Marcus of taking. She wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse. She used to say it with her whole face lit up. The first hands a person ever feels. Imagine that being your job. She practiced taking blood pressure on Marcus while he watched the game, cuffing his arm during commercials, frowning at the little dial with a seriousness that made him love her so much he had to look away. She was the kind of person strangers told their whole lives to. Bus drivers, checkout clerks, the old man at the hardware store who never spoke to anyone, they all softened around Dana. She remembered their names. She asked about their knees, their grandkids, their bad backs. Marcus used to tease her that a 5-minute errand took her 40. She never once apologized for it. "People just want somebody to notice they're there," she'd say. 14 years later, that sentence would take on a weight she could never have meant. That fall, Dana had a boyfriend. His name was Corey Vance. Corey was charming. Everyone said so. He was 24, tall, easy in the way that made parents relax and waitresses smile. He drove a clean silver car and always paid for dinner and always had a reason ready before you thought to ask for one. He worked, he said, in logistics. He traveled a lot for it. He never quite explained where. Marcus never liked him. He couldn't have told you exactly why. Corey shook his hand too firmly and held eye contact a beat too long. And once, when Dana knocked a glass of water across the table, Marcus watched Corey's smile stay perfectly in place while something cold moved behind his eyes and then vanished so fast, Marcus wondered if he'd imagined it. There were other things, small ones, the kind you only line up later. Corey always sat facing the door. He never drank, but he was always the one refilling everyone else's glass. He asked questions, endless, warm, interested questions, and answered almost none. When Marcus once asked plainly what company he worked for, Corey laughed and said, "Boring stuff, man. You don't want to know," and turned it into a story about Dana instead. And it was 3 days before Marcus realized he still didn't have an answer. And he watched Dana around Corey. That was the part that itched at him worst. His sister, who told strangers her whole life, went quiet around her own boyfriend. She checked his face before she spoke. She laughed a half-second late instead of a half-second early laughing, because he had, not because anything was funny. It was such a small change that no one else would have caught it. But Marcus had known that laugh her entire life. Something felt wrong, really wrong. But Dana was happy, or said she was, insisted she was, and Marcus had learned, raising a teenage sister, when to hold his tongue. He has spent 14 years wishing he hadn't. In the weeks before she disappeared, the small wrong details began to pile up. Dana stopped answering her phone on the first ring. Then she stopped answering it at all some nights, calling back the next morning with an apology that sounded rehearsed. She had a bruise on her upper arm once, 4 small ovals in a row. And when Marcus asked, she laughed too quickly and said she'd walked into a door. She started wearing long sleeves, even when the heat was on. Then there was the money. Dana had been saving for a used car for 2 years, dollar by dollar, in an account she was fiercely proud of. In October, she mentioned casually, too casually, that she'd loaned Corey a little to cover a work problem. By November, the account was nearly empty. When Marcus pushed, she got defensive in a way she never had with him. "You don't understand him," she said. "He's under a lot of pressure. It's complicated." "Then explain it to me," Marcus said. She didn't. She looked at the floor, and for one moment her face did something he had never seen it do before. It looked afraid. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. His little sister, who gave peppermints to strangers, who laughed before the joke was over, she was folding in on herself, week by week. And every time he reached for her, she slipped a little further away. The last Sunday call came 3 days before she vanished. She talked fast, distracted. In the background, Marcus heard a man's voice, low, and then a door closing. Dana's voice dropped. "I have to go," she said. "Marcus?" "Yeah." A pause, a long one. "Nothing. I love you. That's your cup. I'll let you go." The line went dead. He would replay those 11 seconds for 14 years. The disappearance happened on a Tuesday night, the 17th of November, 2009. Dana told her roommate she was taking the 9:40 bus to Marin Falls to spend a few days at home before the holiday. She said she needed to see her brother. She packed a small duffel bag, 2 shirts, a toothbrush, her nursing textbook with the corners chewed soft, and the peppermints. She wore the gray canvas jacket with the robin pin. The Greyhound station on 3rd Street was nearly empty that night. It was raining, a thin, cold rain that turned the streetlights into smears. The security camera above the ticket window was broken, had been broken for months. a fact that would haunt everyone later. The clerk, a tired man named Ed Pohl, remembered selling her a ticket at 9:12. He remembered the robin pin. He remembered she bought a single peppermint from the vending machine and it got stuck. And he came around the counter and gave it a smack and it dropped. And she laughed that early laugh and thanked him. That was the last confirmed sighting of Dana Whitlock alive. Ed Pohl would spend years turning that night over in his mind. And he would remember it in strange, sharp fragments. The wet dog smell of the empty waiting room. The buzz of the broken light over the bench, on and off, on and off. The way the girl sat with her duffel bag hugged against her chest instead of on the floor, like she was cold, or like she was holding on to something. He remembered thinking she looked tired in a way that didn't match her age. He remembered she kept glancing at the front doors, and then once at the side exit. He didn't think anything of it. Why would he? People glance at doors. He remembered the peppermint most of all. The little mechanical thunk when it finally dropped. Her early laugh, bright in that dead gray room. "Thank you," she'd said, and unwrapped it and popped it in her mouth. And he'd gone back behind his counter. When he looked up again 5 minutes later, 10, he could never say the bench was empty. The bag was still there. He figured she'd gone to the restroom. He figured she was still around. He figured a lot of things that night that turned out to be the last ordinary thoughts anyone had about Dana Whitlock. The 9:40 bus came. The driver, later interviewed, was certain no young woman in a gray jacket ever boarded. The bus pulled out into the rain at 9:44, and Dana was not on it. Her duffel bag was found the next morning, sitting upright and dry beneath the wooden bench, tucked against the wall as if she'd meant to come right back for it. The bus ticket was inside, unused. Her phone was in the outside pocket, switched off. The peppermint, still in its wrapper, sat on the bench where she'd been sitting, as if she'd set it down for just a second. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, no dropped keys, no scream anyone heard. A camera that didn't work. A rainy night that washed the parking lot clean. It was as if she had stood up from that bench, taken one step, and been erased from the world. It was impossible. And it was real. The detective assigned to the case was named Roy Halloran, and he was already tired the day he caught it. Halloran was 51, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and knees that ached before rain, which in Marin Falls meant they ached most of the time. He'd worked missing persons for 2 decades, and he knew the ugly arithmetic of it. Most people who vanish either want to or are taken by someone they know. He looked first and hardest at Corey Vance. But Corey had an answer for everything. He had been in Columbus that night, he said, 90 minutes away, meeting a client. He produced a hotel receipt. He produced a gas station receipt. He produced, eventually, a grainy ATM photo of himself withdrawing cash at 9:50 p.m. 10 minutes after Dana would have been on that bus, in a city an hour and a half away. His alibi was seamless. Too seamless, Halloran thought. But thinking a thing and proving it are 2 different jobs. They brought in K9 units. The dogs tracked Dana's scent from the ticket window to the bench, to a spot near the side exit of the station, and there, at the edge of the wet parking lot, the trail simply stopped. Not faded, stopped, as if she had been lifted off the ground. The late handler, a laconic man who'd worked 40 searches, stood in the rain scratching his head. "Never seen a track do that," he told Halloran. "They don't just end, unless she got in a vehicle, right here, fast." They searched the river. They dragged the retention ponds with grappling hooks, while Marcus stood on the bank in a borrowed slicker, watching the gray water give up nothing. They walked the woods behind the station in a line, shoulder to shoulder, for 3 days, calling her name until their voices gave out. They found a child's lost shoe and a rusted bicycle and 40 years of beer cans. They did not find Dana. Marcus made the flyers himself. At the copy shop on Main, 400 of them. Her laughing face above the word "missing" in letters he'd made too big out of some animal need to be heard. He stapled them to telephone poles in the rain, and the ink ran. So the next morning, her face was streaked and weeping down every pole in town, and he had to do it all again. He called the tip line, and so many times the volunteers knew his voice. He drove the route the bus would have taken, over and over, at 9:40 at night, as if he might catch the town in the act of hiding her. Halloran was decent to him. That was the thing Marcus never forgot. A lot of cops would have brushed off a grease-knuckled kid demanding answers, but Halloran sat with him in the station break room at 2 in the morning more than once, 2 coffees going cold between them, and told him the truth, even when the truth was nothing. "I don't have it yet," he'd say, "but I haven't put it down." He kept that promise longer than his career lasted. There was one clue that Halloran could never explain, and it gnawed at him for the rest of his career. Ed Pohl, the ticket clerk, remembered one more thing. A car had been idling in the far corner of the lot the whole time Dana waited a dark van, engine running, lights off. He'd noticed it because it was odd, a van just sitting in the rain. When he looked again after the bus left, it was gone. He never saw who was inside. He never got the plate. It was raining too hard. A dark van, running, lights off, then gone. It was the only thread Halloran had, and it led nowhere at all. Weeks turned into months. The tips dried up. The news vans left. Corey Vance moved away to where no one was sure. And slowly, the way these things always do, the case quickly went cold. But Marcus never let go. 14 years is a long time to carry something. Marcus carried it every day. He kept Dana's duffel bag, released to the family after the case stalled, in the closet of his spare room, exactly as it had been found. 2 shirts, a toothbrush, a nursing textbook. He never unpacked it. Some nights he'd stand in the doorway and just look at it, the way you look at a grave. Their mother did not survive the waiting. She held on for 6 years, growing smaller and grayer, keeping Dana's room untouched, the bed made, a glass of water on the nightstand refreshed every morning for a daughter who never came to drink it. She kept Dana's cell phone number active for years, paying the bill out of a fixed income that could not afford it, so that if her daughter ever called, the line would still ring. She left the porch light on every night. She cooked too much food out of habit and then sat looking at the empty chair. Once, in the 3rd year, a woman in a grocery store had the same early laugh, and their mother dropped a full basket on the floor and had to be helped to a bench. And she never really shopped at that store again. When she died in the spring of 2015, the doctor wrote heart failure on the certificate. But Marcus knew the truth. It was a broken heart. It had simply taken 6 years to finish the job. Her last clear words to him, 3 days before the end, were a whisper he had to lean close to hear. "You keep looking," she said. "Promise me. My Dana had a reason. You keep looking until you know what it was." He promised. He held her hand, and he promised, and he meant it with everything he had left. He buried his mother next to an empty plot. He had bought 2, one for her and one for Dana, for the day they finally brought her home. The empty plot sat there in the grass year after year waiting. Marcus mowed the grass over it himself. He married briefly. It didn't last. "You're "You're always somewhere else," his wife told him gently the day she left. And she wasn't cruel about it, and she wasn't wrong. Part of Marcus had stopped permanently on a wooden bench in a rainy bus station in November of 2009, and no amount of love could pull the rest of him forward past it. He wrote letters to Detective Halloran every year on the anniversary. For a while, Halloran wrote back. Then Halloran retired. Then, in 2019, Halloran died. And among the things his widow mailed to Marcus was the detective's private case file on Dana, copied, annotated, the pages soft from handling. In the margin beside the note about the dark van, Halloran had written, years ago, in pen, "This is the thread. Pull it." But there was nothing to pull. There never had been. Marcus was 40 years old now. His hair was going gray at the temples. He drank his Sunday coffee alone, and his hands still shook. He had made a kind of peace with the idea that he would die not knowing. And then, in the autumn of 2023, everything suddenly changed. It started with something completely ordinary. It always does. Marcus's niece, his ex-wife's teenage daughter, who still called him Uncle Marcus and still sent him birthday cards, was doing a school project on facial recognition technology. She'd been playing with one of those public photo search tools, the kind that scans your face and finds strangers online who look like you. And she thought it was hilarious. She sent Marcus a text one Sunday evening. "Uncle Marcus, you have to try this thing, LOL." He almost didn't. But it was 7 o'clock, and he was sitting with his coffee, and the ache was bad that night. And then a thought struck him. So quietly at first that he didn't even feel it land. He had a photograph of Dana, his favorite one. She was laughing in it, that early laugh, caught mid-sound, the gray jacket on, the robin pin catching the light. He had scanned it years ago, so he'd never lose it. His hand was already moving before his mind caught up. He uploaded her face. He told himself it was nothing. The technology matched living people, current people, people who posted photos online. It wasn't a missing persons database. It wouldn't find a woman who'd been gone for 14 years. He watched the little wheel spin, and he felt foolish, and he almost closed the window. Then it stopped spinning. The screen filled with faces the way these tools work, throwing up dozens of possible matches, most of them wrong, strangers with similar cheekbones and similar smiles. Marcus scrolled through them numbly. Not her, not her, not her. And then, in the third row, a face made his blood run cold. It was not Dana. That was the first thing his mind screamed, because the woman in the photo was clearly older, mid-30s, hair darker and shorter, a hardness around the eyes that Dana had never had. The match confidence was high, higher than any of the others, but the tool had been wrong on every face so far. And Marcus told himself it was wrong again, except. He leaned closer to the screen. His coffee went cold beside him. The woman in the photo was standing at some kind of community event, a fundraiser maybe, holding a paper cup in mid-conversation, unaware of the camera. She was wearing a name tag he couldn't read, and pinned to her sweater, small and unmistakable, catching the light exactly the way it had caught the light for 20 years in his memory. A robin. An enamel robin pin. Marcus stopped breathing. There were thousands of robin pins in the world. He knew that. He told himself that out loud in the empty kitchen, his voice strange in his own ears. It's a common pin. It's a coincidence. Don't do this to yourself. Not again, because he had done this to himself before 100 times. 1,000 every gray jacket in a crowd, every early laugh, Every young woman with Dana's walk seen from behind. He had learned, the hard way, over 14 years, not to trust the part of him that wanted so badly to see her. But Dana's pin had a flaw. A tiny chip in the red of the breast, low on the left, where she'd dropped it on the concrete steps of the community college when she was 15, and cried for a solid hour, inconsolable, because it had been their father's, the one thing of his she had. And Marcus had gotten down on his knees and found it in a crack in the sidewalk and pressed it back into her hand. He had teased her about the chip for years afterward, to make it something they laughed about instead of something that hurt. "Your bird's got a war wound," he used to say, battle-tested, like us. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely work the mouse. He zoomed in. The image swelled, blurred, sharpened. The robin filled the screen, then filled it more, the red going grainy, then blocky, then dissolving toward pixels. He almost stopped. He was so sure it would be nothing, a smooth, unbroken red. And he would close the laptop and pour the cold coffee down the sink and go to bed with his heart in pieces one more time. And there, low on the left, in the red of the robin's breast, a chip. The photograph was dated 8 months earlier. The location tag said Ashford, Kentucky, a town Marcus had never heard of, 400 miles south. The woman in the picture was a stranger with a hard face and dark short hair. She was not Dana Whitlock, but she was wearing Dana Whitlock's pin, and she was alive. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. Marcus took what he had to the police the next morning, and they were kind, and they did not believe him. A new detective had inherited the cold case, a younger woman named Priya Sethi, sharp and overworked. She listened to the whole thing. She looked at the printout of the match, and then she said, as gently as she could, the thing Marcus had been dreading. "Mr. Whitlock, a photo-matching website is not evidence. That's not your sister, you said so yourself. And a pin is a pin. I can't reopen a 14-year-old case on a robin." "The chip," Marcus said. "The chip in the red. It's the same chip." "I understand it feels like a sign. I do. But I can't take a JPEG to a judge." He understood. He even agreed with her, in the cold part of his brain that had spent 14 years learning not to hope. But there was another part of him, the part that had knocked a peppermint loose from a vending machine in his memory 10,000 times. And that part was already in the truck, already checking the gas, already looking up the 400 miles to Ashford, Kentucky. He drove down that weekend. He didn't tell anyone. He barely slept the night before. He kept the printout on the passenger seat, folded and unfolded so many times the crease had gone soft and white. He rehearsed what he'd say, and every version sounded insane. "Excuse me, I think you're wearing my dead sister's jewelry." He almost turned around twice. Somewhere south of Cincinnati, the rain started, that same thin, cold rain, and it felt like a hand on the back of his neck. And he gripped the wheel and kept driving. 400 miles is a long time to be alone, with 14 years. He talked to Dana out loud in the truck, the way he sometimes did, apologizing for not seeing it sooner, for holding his tongue. For every Sunday, he'd let the line go dead. By the time he crossed into Kentucky, his voice was gone, and his eyes were raw, and the little printout stared up at him from the seat. A stranger with a hard face wearing a bird with a chip in its breast. Ashford was a small town, not so different from Marin Falls, a main street, a diner, a water tower, churches on every third corner. The photo had come from a fundraiser hosted by a place called New Morning, a residential shelter for women on the edge of town. Marcus parked across the street and sat there for a long time. He didn't have a plan. He wasn't a detective. He was a diesel mechanic with a printout and a 14-year hole in his chest. He watched the front door of New Morning and he waited, the way he'd waited on a bench in a different life. At a little past 4 in the afternoon, the door opened and a woman came out. Dark, short hair, a hard face, mid-30s. She walked with her shoulders slightly hunched, scanning the street once in each direction before she moved a habit Marcus would later understand. That 14 years of fear had carved into her body. It was not Dana, but when she reached up to adjust her collar against the wind, he saw it. The gray canvas jacket, faded now, nearly white at the seams, the sleeves pushed to the elbow out of a habit so old the person wearing it probably didn't remember starting it. And on the collar, the robin, the chip in the red. Marcus got out of the truck. His legs barely held him. He crossed the street. The woman saw him coming, and her whole body went rigid. One hand dropping toward her pocket, her eyes doing the cold, calculating thing he had once seen behind Corey Vance's smile. Except this wasn't cruelty. This was a cornered animal deciding which way to run. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said, and his voice cracked in half. "I'm sorry. I'm looking for my sister. She had a pin like that. Please." "Where did you get the pin?" The woman stared at him. Her hard face didn't soften, but her eyes filled, slowly, with tears she was clearly furious at herself for shedding. "You're Marcus," she whispered. His blood ran cold. "She talked about you every single day," the woman said. "For 14 years. She said her brother would come. Everybody told her nobody was coming. But she said, Marcus will come." "Where is she?" Marcus said. He could barely form the words. "Where is my sister? Is she? The woman shook her head, and the tears spilled over. And she said the thing that broke him and saved him in the same breath. "You'd better come inside." Her name was Renata. She was a resident at New Morning, and before that, she had been something else, in another state, in another life she didn't like to name. She led Marcus to a small back office, closed the door, and told him to sit down. He couldn't. "Dana's not here," Renata said. "I need you to understand that first, so your heart doesn't stop when I tell you the rest. She's not in this building. But she's alive. She was alive 4 days ago. I talked to her on the phone." Marcus put his hand over his mouth. 14 years came out of him in one ragged sound. "The pin's not hers," Renata went on, gently now. "It's mine. She gave it to me. 3 years ago when I got out. When I got here, she pinned it on my jacket and she said, 'This is so they can find you. If anyone's ever looking for you, this is how they'll know you're one of us.'" I didn't understand what she meant. I thought it was just a nice thing to say. Renata's voice shook. "I didn't know it was a real bird. I didn't know it was a real brother. I didn't know it was bait." "Bait," Marcus repeated. "She's been putting them out there for years," Renata said. "Little signals. She sends women out into the world wearing that pin, or one like it, or leaves them in places, because she can't be seen herself. She can't post a photo. She can't use her name. If she surfaces, they'll find her, and they'll find everyone she's hidden. So she does it sideways. She hides in plain sight by hiding other people in plain sight, and she waits for someone who's still looking to notice one small detail." Renata wiped her face. "You noticed. 14 years, and you noticed." Marcus sat down, finally, because his legs simply stopped. "Who's they?" he said. "Who is she hiding from?" And Renata told him. Here is what happened on the night of November 17th, 2009. It took 14 years to learn it, and it came in pieces from Renata that night, from Dana herself in the weeks after, and from the men who eventually went to prison. But laid end to end, it is one story. And it is not the story anyone believed. Corey Vance was not in logistics. Corey Vance moved people. Women mostly moved them across state lines, in and out of towns, from one buyer to another, using a chain of clean cars and clean alibis and a dark van that ran with its lights off. He was charming because charming was the tool of his trade. He found lonely, kind, trusting young women, and he made them love him. And then he made them owe him. And then he made them disappear. He had picked Dana more than a year before she vanished. That was how it worked. Renata explained it was never fast. Men like Corey didn't grab women off the street. That was messy, and it left evidence. They spent months. They made you love them. They isolated you from the people who'd notice, one by one, so gently you thanked them for it. They created a debt, sometimes real, sometimes invented, and then they let the debt do the work fear alone couldn't. The bruises, the drained savings account, the rehearsed apologies, the long sleeves, the way Dana had gone quiet and watchful around the very man who was supposed to make her happy, that was the machinery of it turning. Slowly, the way it always turned. Every wrong detail Marcus had noticed and swallowed had been a gear in it. By that November, Dana owed Corey money she could never pay and loved him in a way that had curdled into terror. And Corey had decided it was time to collect. But Dana was not what he thought she was. She was a girl who noticed people. It was the thing that defined her, the thing that made errands take 40 minutes, the thing their mother's early laugh had passed down, and it was the thing that saved her life. Because in the last weeks, Dana had started to notice Corey. Not the charming surface he showed her, the machinery underneath. She saw a girl in the back of his van once, at a gas station at night. A girl maybe 17 who would not lift her eyes, and whose wrist, Dana realized later, was zip-tied to the door handle under a folded coat. She found a second phone in his glove box, cheap, prepaid, full of names that weren't names. She overheard half of a conversation through a motel wall numbers, cities, a price. And slowly, then, all at once, the clear, cold terror of a trapped animal came over her. And she understood the truth that reframed everything. She was not his girlfriend. She had never been his girlfriend. She was inventory. She was his next delivery, and the countdown had already started. And the only reason she was still walking free was that Corey liked to let them break a little first, because broken ones didn't run. So Dana did the one thing he'd never prepared for. She ran before she broke, and she used the only weapon she had, the thing he'd never once bothered to fear in her. She used how carefully she paid attention. So Dana ran. The bus ticket to Marin Falls was real, and it was a lie. She had no intention of getting on that bus. She knew Corey was watching her. The dark van in the corner of the lot was his, and she knew that if she simply didn't show up somewhere he expected her, he'd come for her fast. So she gave him a place to expect her. A public bus station. A ticket home to her brother. Exactly the innocent, traceable thing a scared girl would do. She planned it with the same care she brought to everything. She knew Corey watched her phone, so she used it normally right up to the end, even the last Sunday call to Marcus, with Corey's voice low in the background, and a door closing, was made under his eyes. She knew he'd expect a scared girl to run home to her big brother. So she gave him exactly that. A bus ticket to Marin Falls, bought in the open, a girl going home for the holidays. The most innocent, traceable, believable thing in the world. Bait for the hunter. And while the dark van sat watching the front of the station, engine running, lights off, Dana walked to the bench in full view, set down her duffel bag, set down a peppermint like she'd be right back, every detail arranged to say a girl was here and then was taken, and then she slipped out the side exit into the rain. The exit where the K9 trail would later stop. It didn't stop because she was lifted off the ground. It stopped because a car was waiting there, in the dark, at the edge of the lot. Not Corey's. A woman the network only ever called Sister Agatha ran a quiet, illegal, holy little operation out of an old convent 40 miles away, a chain of safe houses and back roads and new names that moved terrified women out of the reach of men like Corey Vance, and never, ever wrote a single thing down. Because a written record was a death warrant. Dana had found them the way frightened women always found them. Sideways, through a whisper, through a kind nurse at a free clinic who'd pressed a phone number into her palm and said only if you're sure, and only once. The plan was insane and desperate, and it worked precisely because it was total. Leave everything. The bag, the phone, the ticket, the peppermint, the robin pin's whole world, leave it so completely and so cleanly that it looked like an abduction rather than an escape. Because a runaway gets hunted, but a girl taken by a rival. Corey would assume he'd been robbed, curse his luck, and move on to the next one. A dead girl doesn't get looked for by the man she's fleeing. And so Dana Whitlock chose to become, in the eyes of the whole world, a dead girl. It worked too well. It fooled Corey. It fooled the police. It fooled Detective Halloran and his dark van thread. And it fooled Marcus. And it broke their mother's heart. And Dana knew it would. And she did it anyway, because the alternative was being sold. And because staying would have painted a target on Marcus, too. Corey had already made that threat once, softly, the way he said everything. Be a shame if anything happened to that brother of yours. Dana disappeared to keep the people she loved alive. And then she did the thing that no one expected. The thing that turned a scared girl into something else entirely. She didn't just hide. She started hiding others. For 14 years, Dana Whitlock, under a name that was not her name, helped run the very network that had saved her. She learned it from Sister Agatha, and she was better at it than anyone. She understood the machinery of men like Corey from the inside. She knew how they thought, how they tracked, how they hunted. She spent her stolen life pulling other women out of the dark, one at a time. 40 women, 60. More, no one had an exact count. Because the whole point was that there were no records. She could never surface. Corey Vance had gone to prison in 2016 for an unrelated trafficking charge in another state. Marcus wept when Renata told him this, because it meant the monster had been behind bars for years, and he never knew, but Corey's network had not died with his freedom. Others carried it on, and they had long memories. If Dana Whitlock ever proved she was alive, she would not be the only one who paid. Every woman she'd hidden, every safe house, every new name, all of it ran through her. Her anonymity was not cowardice. It was the roof over 60 women's heads. So she used the pin. The robin pin, chipped in the breast, was her signature passed to women she saved, sent out into the world as a quiet flag. If someone who loves you is still looking, this is how they'll find their way to us. Most were never noticed. She knew that. She sent them out anyway, year after year, dropping her small detail into the ocean of the internet, trusting that love was patient, and that somewhere a brother was still checking a website at 7 o'clock on a Sunday. She never stopped believing you were looking, Renata told Marcus. Even when I told her it was crazy, even when I said 14 years is too long, nobody looks that long. She just smiled and said, "You don't know my brother. Marcus wept into his hands. Then he lifted his head and said, "Take me to her." It was not that simple, of course. It couldn't be. Renata made calls, careful ones, on a phone that would be destroyed afterward. There were people to convince. There was a network that had survived 14 years precisely by never trusting a stranger. And here was a strange man claiming to be a ghost's brother. Dana herself had to decide whether to believe it, and whether the risk was worth it, and whether after everything she could bear to be Dana Whitlock again, even for an hour. It took 9 days. On the 9th day, Marcus drove to a nothing town in Tennessee, to the parking lot of a laundromat at an hour past midnight. And he waited the way he had waited on a bench, the way he had waited by an empty grave, the way he had waited his whole adult life. He'd been early by 2 hours. He couldn't help it. He sat in the truck with the engine ticking as it cooled, watching every set of headlights that passed, his heart lurching at each one and then sinking as they went by. A buzzing light hung over the laundromat lot, on and off, the same broken rhythm as a light over a bench a lifetime ago. And Marcus thought, of course it would be raining. Of course there would be a broken light. Some stories rhyme whether you want them to or not. At midnight, a car pulled in. Plain, dark, unremarkable, the kind of car you forget the second it passes, which was, he'd learn, entirely the point. It parked at the far edge of the lot, away from the light. For a long moment, nothing happened. Marcus understood somehow that she was doing what he was doing, sitting, bracing, hardly daring. Then the door opened. A woman stepped out. She was 34 now. Her hair was going gray at the temples, the same as his, the same gray, from the same 2 parents. And the sight of it undid something in his chest. There were lines in her face that 14 years of fear and courage had written there, and a wariness in how she held herself. Weight forward, ready. She was not the girl who laughed before the joke was over. That girl had had to die so this woman could live. She stopped a few feet away, close enough, in the bad light, for him to see her eyes. And she looked at him the way you look at something you'd made yourself stop believing in, terrified it isn't real, more terrified that it is. Then she reached up, out of a habit older than memory, older than fear, and pushed the sleeves of a faded gray canvas jacket up to her elbows. "Marcus," she said. His name in her voice. 14 years since he'd heard it. His legs nearly went. "It's your cup," he said, choking on it. The old words, the Sunday words, the only words that would come. "I'll let you go." Her face, the hard, careful, guarded face that had kept 60 women alive, broke open all at once. And underneath it was his little sister, exactly, impossibly, where she had always been. "No," Dana said. And the tears came, and she took a step, and then another. "No, not this time. This time you don't have to let me go." They met in the middle of that empty lot, and held on to each other as if the last 14 years were deep water. And they were both, finally, breaking the surface. She was so much smaller than he remembered, and so much stronger. He could feel her heart going against his chest, fast, alive, alive. He said her name over and over, into her gray-streaked hair. She gripped the back of his jacket in 2 fists and shook. And she smelled like peppermint. After everything, after 14 years, a stolen name, a war he'd never known she was fighting, she still carried them in her pocket. She had never stopped. Some part of Dana Whitlock had refused, through all of it, to become someone who didn't give peppermints to strangers. They stayed like that a long time. The broken light buzzed on and off above them. Neither of them let go. Justice, when it came sideways the way everything in this story came sideways. Dana could not walk into the light, even now, even reunited. The danger was real. But she gave Marcus something, and she gave the FBI something, and it was more than any confession. 14 years of a woman who had studied traffickers from the inside, everything she knew, every name, every route, every dark van. She had been building a case her whole hidden life, the way she'd started writing things down in the last weeks before she ran. Only now, the notebook was enormous, and it was aimed like a weapon. It happened in a windowless federal office over many careful months. Dana would not give her real name, not at first, not until protections were in place. She had spent 14 years learning exactly how a name could get people killed. But she gave them everything else. She had a memory honed by necessity and a notebook, several notebooks, filled with the tiny, careful left-handed print Marcus would have known anywhere. Routes, fake company names, the way the money moved, descriptions of men she'd only ever seen once, rendered so precisely that agents matched 3 of them to open files within a week. The lead agent, a woman who had worked trafficking for 11 years, told Marcus privately that she had never had a source like his sister. People who survive this, she said, they run as far as they can, and they never look back. And God? Who could blame them? Your sister ran into it. For 14 years, she built a case nobody asked her to build, in the dark, alone, in case someday somebody could use it. The agent's voice had caught. We can use it. With Dana as a protected, anonymous source, federal agents unwound what remained of Corey Vance's network over the following 2 years. It came apart the way these things do, one arrest turning into 2. One frightened man trading names for a lighter sentence, the whole rotten structure sagging and then collapsing under its own weight. 19 arrests, 11 convictions. Corey Vance himself, already in prison on the unrelated charge, was indicted again. And the second time the evidence was overwhelming. And this time, he would not come out. Marcus sat in the courtroom the day that sentence was read. Corey never knew the woman who damned him was the girl he'd once written off as dead on a rainy bench. Dana had asked Marcus to be there in her place, to witness it for both of them. And he did. And he did not look away. The women Dana had hidden began, slowly, carefully, to come into the light, because with the network dismantled, the roof no longer had to be invisible to hold. Some found their own families. Some testified. Renata, who had worn the pin that started it all, stood up in a courtroom and told a jury what had been done to her in a steady voice. And afterward she said it was the robin that had given her the nerve. This is so they can find you, Dana had told her. This is how they'll know you're one of us. It had meant more than either of them knew. And Dana Whitlock, legally dead for 14 years, was quietly, carefully brought back to life. She could not undo everything. That was the grief that stayed. She could not give her mother the phone call. She could not take back the 6 years of a fresh glass of water on the nightstand, the porch light burning every night, the paid-up phone bill on a fixed income waiting for a ring that never came. She could not give back the laughing girl in the Polaroids, or the Sunday calls, or the wedding their mother never got to plan, or the person Dana herself might have become if the world had let her stay. Marcus took her to the cemetery on a clear, cold morning, the first hard frost of autumn silvering the grass. He took her to the grave beside their mother's, to the empty plot he had bought and mowed every summer for 14 years. For a daughter, he had believed, in his darkest hours, he would one day lower into that ground. Dana stood at the edge of it for a long time. Then she knelt in the frozen grass over her own empty grave, and she pressed her hand flat against the cold earth of her mother's, and she said she was sorry, over and over. The words came apart in her mouth. She told her mother she'd had a reason. She told her about the girls, 60 of them, more, all the ones who got to go home because a nurse pressed a number into a shaking hand, and a scared girl chose the hardest road there was. She told her she'd carried the robin pin the whole time. She told her she had never, not for one single day, stopped being her daughter. Marcus knelt down beside her in the frost, the way he'd once knelt on the community college steps to find a chip of enamel in a crack in the sidewalk. And he put his arm around his sister's shaking shoulders and held her up, the way he always had, the way he always would. She knew, Marcus told her, kneeling beside his sister. In her own way, I think she always knew you didn't just leave us. She used to say, "My Dana had a reason." She said it right up until the end. He put his arm around Dana's shoulders. She was right. My God, Dana. She was right. They filled in the empty grave that autumn, not with Dana, but with the duffel bag, the 2 shirts, the toothbrush, the nursing textbook with the corners chewed soft. Marcus buried the 14 years of waiting in the ground where he'd been ready to bury her. And he planted a small robin, cast in iron, on top of the stone. Then he took his sister home. There's a thing people believe about the ones who vanish. They believe that a person who disappears has abandoned you. That silence is the same as not caring. That 14 years of nothing must mean 14 years of a person who simply chose to walk away. But that's not always what silence is. Sometimes silence is the loudest kind of love there is. Sometimes a person vanishes not to escape the people who love them, but to save them. Sometimes the ones who seem to have run away have actually spent every hidden hour of every hidden year fighting a war we never even knew was being waged for us, and for strangers, and for people whose names we'll never learn. Dana Whitlock gave up her name, her mother's last years, her own laughing face, and 14 years of Sunday phone calls, and she spent all of it pulling other people out of the dark. She trusted, against all reason, that her brother would keep looking. And she was right, because love doesn't check the clock. Love doesn't accept a cold case. Love keeps refreshing the water on the nightstand, keeps mowing the grass over the empty grave, keeps checking the website at 7 o'clock on a Sunday, year after year after year. One small detail, a chip in the red of a robin's breast. That was all it took in the end, because someone had never, ever stopped looking closely enough to see it. In the end, love proved stronger than the darkness. It always does. It just, sometimes, takes 14 years to prove it.